Good evening. It is Monday, January 31st at 6:32, and I'm going to call our utility rate listening session to order. Thank you for everyone being here tonight, both in person and online. Our goal is to have open communication with our residents and neighbors and to offer an opportunity to ask questions and inquire and to help us make informed decisions. So I'm going to turn it over to our administrator, Clarissa Hadler, to walk us through and share some information. You want to?
No.
All right. Move right along to adopt the agenda.
Second by Fay.
Second by Fay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Thank you, Mayor. I put together a very brief presentation. I want it to be like the truth and taxation where I made you guys sit here for 30 minutes, and this is by far Bonnie's expertise over mine. Caitlin and Mike, can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Okay. So for anyone viewing this in the future, again, this is a very brief overview. The complete utility rate study can be found on the city's website. The study was conducted in 2021 by APDO, our accounting firm. It was, I believe you guys kind of started it right before I got here. In January or February, we approved it, and then we had it finished towards August, and was first presented in September, and then we walked through it, made a few changes, and saw the final version in December. So kind of let's start with the history of kind of where our funds were. Okay. That's not. I have two computers going today, just in case one of them drops off the internet here, you guys. So, so we're looking at a chart of water fund costs and receipts. So here are the blue to the left in each of these columns is the operating receipts, so the revenues within the water fund. The column on the right has the operating costs as well as the debt payments. So you can see in each of these 4 years shown, the expenses are over or exceed revenues substantially. So over $200,000 in 2017, and then growing even in 2018. A large part of this, if we could see this chart going back a few more years, the revenues or the rates, the water rates, water and sewer rates were adopted in 2011, maybe a slight increase in 2012. It's a little confusing from the ordinance history. And so the revenues have essentially largely remained the same. Now in 2014, I believe, that's maybe when you guys started doing some pretty significant reconstruction projects. And so we added this debt service. So you can see, you know, without these debt service payments in green, the revenues exceed the costs. As soon as we start adding these significant costs on there with the debt service, with reconstruction costs, that's when we start to lose money in these funds. So you can see the cash balance is the red line above, and that has been decreasing for the last 4 years, as shown in here. We had a reconstruction project in 2021, so that would add debt service payments, and we have a pretty aggressive reconstruction schedule for the next 10 years even. So there really is a lot of makeup to be done on that fund. So the next slide is essentially showing the same thing with sewer funds. You can see the cash balance though in the sewer fund is actually significantly lower than in the water fund. So it's currently positive, but it was positive in 2017, 2018, 2019. It did drop negative in 2020 and 2021. This is stormwater. So stormwater is, has been staying relatively profitable. It dropped below just a little bit 2020. So within the ABDO utility rate study, Bonnie, our accountant, provided two scenarios. She looked at two different scenarios with different increases. So sorry, this got a little small for projecting, but her scenario one proposed a higher increase of 25% the first year, and then 15, 10, 5, and 3 in following years. Scenario two proposed a 15% increase the first year, and then 12, 10, 5, and 3. Now, Bonnie's goal is kind of mentioned right up here in the top line. So in scenario one, her goal was to achieve a positive cash balance by 2026 and a minimum target reserve balance by 2030. And so minimum target reserve balance, we have that in the general fund as well. It's essentially you just want to have a certain amount of operating capital to fund your enterprise. So scenario one achieved that target reserve balance by 2030. Scenario two, the only goal is to achieve a positive cash balance by 2030. So it's a much longer time frame, and it does not address the minimum target reserve balance. These charts are just kind of a comparison between the scenario one and scenario two. So you've got the purple lines are the minimum target operating reserve. The lines are cash balance, scenario one, scenario two. The bottom chart shows operating costs and debt service compared to revenues in scenario one and scenario two. And then we've got water on the left, sewer on the right. This chart is the summary chart. The utility rate study does go into detail quarter by quarter. This chart that I grabbed is the total bill. So it is broken up by quarter, and it does project out a few years. So the change, your total annual average charges currently are around $850, with the this is scenario two, I believe. Sorry, let me just double check something, make sure I grab the right table. So this is scenario two. So you'll see the 2022 average annual charges goes from $846 to $961 for an annual increase of $115.49. A quarterly increase of just under $29. That's for residential. Commercial, we'll see a slightly higher chance. And obviously this is based on an average household average. So commercial charges will increase from about $1,200 up to about $1,400 for a quarterly increase of around $50. Now, council had discussed this, as I mentioned, a number of times. At the December workshop, the proposal was to do a 15% increase the first year and a tentative 15% increase the next year, and then reassess. Utility rate changes are done by ordinance, so we would look at adopting that I believe staff was speculating on the February meeting, so that we could get our systems changed in time for the first quarter billing. And that would also help Medina. We have to get the information to Medina so that they can adjust their billing as well. So it just kind of gives us some lead time. So that is essentially the end of my very brief presentation. I'd be happy to entertain any questions. Cross my fingers, I'd be able to answer them.
Any questions from staff? Okay.
We talked at length about the averages that she used, and I understand the tables in the presentation on the averages was just to give us a idea of, on an average basis, what a average homeowner or average commercial entity would be paying on a given quarter, extrapolated over the years. But when Bonnie went back into it to determine the spreadsheets that gives her the cash balances and the minimum operating reserves, did she use real usage, annual usage, water and sewer on that, or did she just use the averages and then multiply them by the number of commercial properties and residential properties? How?
I believe those tables came from her actual projections. So she's got in the utility rate study at the end are the financial projections.
Yeah.
And the charts that she developed for those cash balances and such, I believe those come from those financial statements, not from just a simple projection.
And I know she eliminated outliers in determining, okay, so typically same amount of low outliers are eliminated as the number of high outliers, and you come up with this bell curve. But was any consideration or any thought given as far as how we're going to get in 2023, 2024, and all the way to 2023, based on these, what I would consider to be high outliers, the commercial properties such as restaurants, nursing homes, large employers, et cetera, that have either use a lot of water and a lot of sewer, or they have a lot of water and a lot of sewer hookups, apartment buildings, et cetera, et cetera. How do they play into achieving those minimum amounts in our cash balances?
So again, I would go back into those financial statements or those projections. And so, she removed the outliers from the averaging, but I don't think she removed them from the financial projection.
Okay,
Like,
that's,
she
I
made
guess
sure
that
those were added in.
shortcut question would have been,
Yeah.
did those outliers get put back in for the financials, or is she strictly using averages?
I'm fairly certain they were, because I believe we had talked about that, and then she went back, and then she said, yes, that did affect the cash balances. I vaguely recall that conversation.
Okay.
And we can, there's always going to be information that comes back to us later, right?
Right.
And so that's one of the great things about having these studies is that we have a basis. We can compare our financials next year to how did this compare to what the study projected, and reassess. And that's kind of that feedback loop that we'd be looking for in discussing those 23 rates. So we're looking at 22 rates. We know that in order to achieve that minimum cash balance or cash balance above zero, that we will need additional future increases. we can use that additional information to determine what that appropriate level is.
So the ordinance would be written, since we talked about passing an ordinance and then reevaluating, ordinance would be subject to potential change, obviously,
Well, the ordinance, I would adopt the ordinance for
to
2022.
own.
That's it.
That's
You
it.
don't do it
And
going
then we
forward.
revisit.
That's
Yeah.
what
Then
they
we
tried
can
to do
check the
10 years
data.
ago. It didn't work.
Fair enough.
Because otherwise we're trying to predict something that.
And I think these are gonna be.
Well, I think that's, oh, sorry.
Councilmember DeLuca?
Mayor, this is supposed to be a listening session for us to listen to the public, not a presentation of facts or regurgitation of stuff we've already talked about. I'd like to listen to the public.
Would you like to speak, Mr. Brooks? We have one resident here and none online that I've seen. Is that correct?
That's correct.
No pressure, but you are welcome to the podium.
Sure, Mike. I'll make a comment. My name's Doug Brooks, 5304 Clayton Drive, Cable Point. With the information that I have, which is hardly none, you guys have all of it. One paragraph that I read. And in that paragraph, it said, was it audit,
Like this study, yeah.
a study? And it said in the study that nothing's been done for 10 years. That it's been, the funds have been underfunded for 10 years. My question to you guys is, why did we wait so long? If something needs money, you give it to it. If it needs 2% a year, give it to them. Don't wait to the end. Excuse me. Don't wait to the end and give us a 9%. I could care less if I gotta pay more for some services that only go up because of cost of living or workman comp, insurance, materials. It's all part of the game. That's why it's part of government. We gotta pay for the services we have. So my question to you, and hopefully you can answer it, why we wait 10 years to try and solve the problem now? That's all I got.
I didn't pay him to say that.
But I think me and the public deserve an answer to that. Because that was in the information that was given to everybody. Okay. So Mike, could you answer that question for me?
Well, I can give you my perspective. I don't know if it's an answer for the council, but I think if you go back to some of Clarissa's slides earlier in the presentation, it talked about the fund balances and the amounts of receipts actually exceeded what we were needing until we started doing construction projects. Now, when I got on council 8-9 years ago, we hadn't done a construction project in 20 years. So I think what we are doing is trying to recognize that at some point that there is a catch up, and at some point the system that worked for a number of years started to not work as we begin to add the first, second, third, and now coming into the fourth or fifth or sixth project that we're going to be doing.
Can I comment on that? That's not a good enough answer. You have projections every year. You know what's gonna happen. You know what's going on. If I'm underfunded, you do audits, they tell you, oh, you're underfunded. And if you don't put money into it, you're gonna keep compounding the problem. You're not doing the math right, and it's pretty simple. I'm not saying no more.
I could actually, obviously, I'm a big believer in making sure we have cost of living increases. But I would definitely say that the information that was available probably wasn't as explained as well as it could have been. Council members are never experts in finance, and making sure that you have either your accountant or administrator who can explain all of these things and kind of push for those in a manner that's understandable is pretty important in moving those things forward.
Sure, I agree 100%. But why weren't people coming in like yearly to check the books to make sure they're right?
Yeah, Doug, I can, so yeah, I'm the shortest tenured, right? So since I've been on adventure, this is my third budget cycle. The first two budget cycles is really the first time I think that the conversation came up where then all of a sudden our auditors that come in every year said to us, there's a decline going on in these fund balances. We should look at doing a rate study. And so then now this year we're doing the rate study. Because like Mike said, we were positive in those funds until really just when I came on. So I guess I did it. I don't know. But the conversation came up right when I came on board was, hey, right, we're starting to decline now on our balances. We should probably look at doing a rate study, and that's what we did this year.
But keep in mind that the discussion on the rate study as a suggestion from Abdo came during budget discussions of 2020.
Yeah. That was just that.
Right.
So then they made a proposal to us to do a rate study, I want to say November, December of 2020. Does that sound about right? And then we approved the rate study the following year, about 12 months ago. And so now we're just getting the rate studies back. Now we've had drafts of this, Doug, since this fall.
Right.
And we've been going back and forth on different scenarios and fine tuning numbers and things like that. We think we come up with something that is working.
Yeah, I understand that part. That's great. That's the great part. I'm trying to say. The great part. The full part of it, you're doing everything right.
And to your point, we should not be in this position. And Clarissa, in doing research, when the last study was done, I don't want to speak for you, maybe you can explain it better. When they did it, there was a plan with that had, do you want to explain what you found since? I'm
Right, and I
speaking
didn't
for you?
even recognize this before
Which none of us knew. We're all,
the fee schedule is a little, we're gonna clean that up a little bit. But it had this kind of weird reference back to an ordinance, and then that ordinance referenced itself. So it took me a while to kind of trace it back, but and when I say me, I mean Jill did it. But they had actually adopted increases. The last time they did it, they adopted it all in one ordinance. And so there was an attempt at this kind of future, we're going to do these increases year to year, but there just wasn't any implementation. And that's one of the hard parts when you've got staff turnover and this knowledge is lost.
Right.
And then you've got to kind of
Like
pick things
continuity
up.
is
And
really good.
It's
And-
not just staff turnover, it's
Yeah.
also
Council
council turnover,
turnover.
because there's
Right.
it was
this
prior to
this
all of us.
institutional knowledge that someone with 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or 8 years brings with it to new council members as they come on board. And
Right.
so it's
And if the systems aren't clear.
Right.
So again, I went to a fee schedule that referenced an ordinance that referenced itself, it was this weird sort of, and it would never, I don't know, figuring out the look back and what am I supposed to be doing? So what I'm trying to set you guys up on is here's what we do annually. So annually, we're gonna look at the fee schedule. Annually, we're gonna look at the utility rates, and so it just becomes this kind of habitual feedback loop for all of these things.
And I do hear what you're saying. I mean, it's much easier to handle a 2 to 3% increase if needed to maintain versus all of a sudden having a substantial increase because we had years of time. And
I really don't care if it's 10%. I just want, why you chasing a horse's tail here? That's all.
But Doug, I do want to respond to something. I think if you look at every incremental step that council has taken in the last 10 years, I don't think any one of those single steps could be viewed as we missed something. when we got to 2020 and the receipts started going down, we had our auditors say, take a peek at this. That's when we did the audit in 2021, or the study. And here we are coming with the rate increase of some sense in 2022. That may seem like a slow process, but it is very intentional and it's very well thought out. I do not think that a mistake was made back in the 6, 8, 9 years ago. I really don't. At the time, those made sense from a cash perspective. It's always easy to look back in hindsight and say, well, if we would have done something, but if we have that crystal ball, then we should be sitting in these chairs.
Good discussion. Does anyone enjoy this online? Well, I just want to make sure that someone enjoyed this. So next steps then, first, what does that look like?
So, again, the proposal is to do a 15% increase. And so unless I hear otherwise from council, that would be what I would bring to you at the February business meeting. So that would be an ordinance revising the fee schedule. I believe that is planned for across the board, but not that capital charge.
What's the capital?
Will that be
The $25
Yeah, the water
okay, the water treatment, whatever,
Yeah.
whatever that was earmarked for.
We might review. And so then that would be implemented for first quarter billing. I had mentioned Medina, they bill monthly, and so theirs would take effect essentially at the same time ours does, except it would be only for the prior month. So that would be for their March billing.
State water charge stays the same. The $25 a quarter facilities fee, or whatever it's referred to as, stays the same. Is there a fixed rate?
But a fixed rate and the variable rate, those were both subject to the
15%. 50% across the board for water. 15% on sewer. Is it 15% on storm water too?
Yes, scenario 2 is. Scenario 1. And just to be clear, in this resolution, we would only, at the business meeting, we would only be approving for 2022. Correct. And then we will reevaluate next year to see everything, or the end of this year.
Now, so that would be effective then the April 1 utility billing, which would be January, February, March.
Correct.
Okay. Can I ask you one more question in the long term? Because debt service has such a big component to this. I did the arithmetic on your page. Page 26. So we were pretty consistent on our debt service from 22 through about 26, then it drops, then it climbs, and then it drops again. The we have some debt falling off the books, but we also have debt that we're bringing on the book proposed for 25, 27 and 29 or something like that. I'm assuming that's for the future street reconstruction projects. Is that right?
Correct.
And the numbers that Bonnie used to put into this spreadsheet to come up with this debt service for the future years, say 25 through 30, are based on Bolton and Bank numbers?
Correct.
Okay.
And that, we just had a discussion a couple weeks ago about engineering CIP projects and reconstruction things. So, I mean, those things could shift around, obviously, feedback loops, et cetera, et cetera. So what she was working with was the CIP would have been in that kind of June timeframe. For the one that I think they had completed that late 2020-ish, early 2021.
So if we were to go with scenario 2, we obviously would not be meeting the minimum target reserve balance. So what are the risks involved with that? Is that just the bond ratings?
Well,
Or if we were to,
yeah, I mean,
bond or-
bond rating is part of it, but bond ratings are very multifaceted. You know, it's not like we're gonna run out of money, right? We have that. So what's happening right now is that the general fund is essentially kind of floating these other funds. And so it's certainly not ideal to not be meeting that minimum reserve. And it could theoretically affect our bond rating. Again, it's kind of multifaceted. So if this was our only issue, then maybe it's not that big of a deal. If we have, you know, if there are 12 things that they're looking at when they do our bond rating and we're not meeting standards on, you know, half of one or more, then it'd be significantly more concerning. But
any comments from you know?
Nope, we had a great discussion at workshop. Got all my questions answered there. Thanks.
Anything else, Mr. Brooks?
No.
Thank you for being, thank you for being here.
Taxes are the way it is, you know. We gotta do, we gotta pay for that.
We want to maintain it. Anything else tonight?
not for me.
All right. With that then.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Motion to adjourn by DeLuca, second by DeLong, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Both same sign. Meeting's adjourned at 7:05.
Thanks for coming out, Doug.
Yeah, just for listening.